We've now done the research to look at all the processes of change that have ever been identified and replicated in a randomized controlled trial focused on mental health. And I can say a sentence that captures all of them. Do you want to hear the sentence?
Please.
Dear human beings, please learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in life. Scale that to your relationships and take care of your body. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, hey everyone, welcome to the Integral Wellbeing Podcast, where we explore the true causes of well-being from an integral perspective. I'm your host, Timo Peters, and my guest today is Dr. Stephen Hayes, an emeritus professor of psychology at the University of Nevada in the US. Professor Hayes is both a clinical psychologist and a researcher, and is one of the most cited psychologists in the world with 47 books and nearly 700 scientific articles published. He's most well known for his creation of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which is one of the more evidence-based psychotherapies around today. And currently he's working on a revolutionary new approach to evidence-based psychotherapy called process-based therapy, where we kind of step away from applying protocols to syndromes. We start targeting the underlying processes of change that actually move individuals from suffering to flourishing. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. Welcome, Professor.
I'm so glad to be here with you, Timo. And I got to tell you, that's the best introduction I've had in the last year, the most sophisticated. You've done a little bit of looking at what we're doing, so I'm especially looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear. So yeah, as we just said, just before the cameras were rolling, I reached out to you because I discovered your kind of pioneering work on evidence-based psychotherapy, from ACT to process-based therapy, and now working on very exciting digital tools like PsychFlex. I hope we can talk about that as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted everyone to be able to understand what you and your colleagues have been discovering about these underlying processes of change, like what really makes the change happen that really improves people's lives. So maybe we can just sort of start with a very short bio. I think it would be cool for people to know just what was your original motivation to pursue a career like this in psychology and psychotherapy? What drove you into this?
Well, if I back up even before college and so forth, it's seeing misery in my home. And that's what most people come into the field of psychotherapy and psychological work. I had the vision, though, I really wanted to be promoting human prosperity, not just dealing with human problems. And people like Maslow, peak experiences, especially cool. But I soured on the idea that was in that more humanistic wing, that we needed a whole different kind of science. I thought, no, we need experimental science, but we just need to grapple with these issues in a different way, in a way that doesn't lose their richness. And as soon as you start saying, well, that's just, or that's only, I don't want to hear the rest of the sentence, because human complexity deserves attention. So I've moved over to more behavioral perspective, but the wing that I landed in was this very functional, contextual perspective, very misunderstood by most people. But I was fortunate to fall in with more contextually oriented people who viewed behavioral thinking as holistic, as humanistic, as one where you don't reduce human experience, but you allow yourself to try to come up with ways of thinking and partitioning what is, after all, a one. It's one stream, but you're dividing it up, for analytic purposes. You're trying to get something done. And I spent 45 years trying to hack the human mind, essentially, and come up with the smallest set of principles that do the most good in the most area for the most people. That tradition had principles in it, like that contextualistic tradition, like reinforcement and stimulus control, done kind of one animal at a time, but then could be scaled to almost all the tips of the evolutionary branches. Not a priori saying it's going to apply to every. Let's just see if it does. And it turns out that principles like that do a really good job. I mean, it changes. I mean, an eel might sense electricity and you can't, or a bird might sense magnetism and you can't, but Yeah, I mean, ever since the Cambrian, 545 million years ago, we've learned how to interact in and with the one world in a way that leads to survival. It evolved. And then something very different happened. A couple million years ago, a million years ago, depends on what the hominids were doing, where we evolved what you and I are doing right now. And what is that? This symbolic learning, there's a lot of theories out there, mostly kind of associationistic, or the brain did it, but why would the brain be so big? It's a horrible thing, makes it hard to have babies. Why would you evolve something like that? Well, I was with my colleagues, but able to come up with a new idea, which is that we learn how to relate. But when we say relate, we mean the kind of relations that are in two directions and can be combined that change what you do and are controlled by your culture. Learn it in one, derive it in two, put it in networks that change what you do. That's the ditty that explains 40 years of work on that. And ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or training, depending on whether or not it's in a psychotherapy context, that's the difference in the T word, has over the last 40 years been able to take that core idea that we are the social primates who learn how to speak and listen in ways that are coordinated in your brain, unlike any other living creature on the planet that we know of, such that, I can say, don't touch that, it's hot. And, if your child is well trained to listen to guidance, may never touch it again. Doesn't have to learn by burning that a hot stove is dangerous, or that fire isn't something to put your fingers in. And that's given us huge advantages. But the problem is that when we break out of that beginning social guidance and cooperation to sort of have a different sense of self, when consciousness breaks right about the time that the religious traditions say that you now can be held accountable for your actions, somewhere in that 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old range, you can turn your life into a problem to be solved. You can find yourself wanting. And in fact, there's nothing about you that can't be criticized or aggrandized. And now you are in a really different position where the tools that you use to help navigate life get turned on you and ask you to hide, to pretend, to lie, to not see. And next thing you know, you need a meditation retreat just to show up to the present moment, which is where the rest of creation is all the time. So it's a paradox. The things that have led me to talk to you thousands and thousands of miles away in real time is the very same thing that is right at this moment tempting hundreds of thousands of people around the world to maybe kill themselves. That's really weird. And if we don't learn how to manage that better using our wisdom traditions, but also our scientific traditions, good luck, because whatever change was being produced by this wonderful tool called relational learning or symbolic learning has been put on steroids, and we're about to have artificial intelligence that's better than us, robots that do our bidding, et cetera, you name it. And if we don't have modern minds for that modern world, we're just going to drown in it. So that's the 5-minute version of my life.
The
Here I
long and
am at
short of it.
years
Yeah.
old.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think what you were just describing, especially sort of the theoretical work behind ACT, I think is that relational frame theory. Is that right?
Yes,
Of-
indeed. It's called Relational Frame Theory. And it's not just a theory, it's an active research program. If you have a child who doesn't have a sense of self or whatever, run, don't walk to it. Behavior
Right.
analysts, the RFT, or Relational Frame Theory, really well. And in big randomized trials and so forth, it's doing better than anything else that's out there. It can raise your intelligence. It can help you do a better job of advertising. It can take a child who can't speak and help them learn how to. But, if you do that
Mm,
as you improve, people then become miserable in a different way. And we
right.
see actually in the work that we're doing with children, And we do what every parent listening to me knows. You drag your children out of innocence because you
Mm.
just can't afford to have them running around pooping on the floor. They need to understand what's going on. But as soon as they do, guess what? They get to be like you. And
Mm.
that's not necessarily such a happy result to go from these sweet creatures that we love looking at and smile at just intrinsically
Yeah.
to creatures who start lying and hiding and pretending and feel shame and blame and then need work on their psychological flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I understand it correctly, you kind of went from this sort of behavioral analysis into the, I guess, the first sort of form of psychotherapy that most people would be most familiar with, that is kind of often called evidence-based, would be sort of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I guess you have sort of a classical form of that, but then you start to see the emergence of the third wave therapies, which ACT was one of those. Maybe you can
Yeah.
kind of just very quickly just, how did that emerge, and what has been, how did that affect sort of the evidence-based therapy or intervention field?
Yeah, I'll answer that question, but I want to add 30 seconds beforehand because the wing that I'm out of behavioral thinking, people are shocked to find this out, was also at the core of the development of things like Gestalt therapy. One of the three
Right.
founders of Gestalt therapy was a rat running behavior analyst. And so, and if you had to pick one to say what's out there that's like ACT, you'd probably pick Gestalt or emotion focused therapy in its modern manifestation. But yes, behavior therapy, which after all were driven by these principles, mostly from non-human animals,
Mm.
um, soon enough realized, well, we got to deal with cognition. And well, how are we going to deal with it? And so, we either went towards most more associationistic ideas, which are 150 years old, or we started just asking our clients and trying to come up with a theory. And that's what the cognitive therapy wing did. And the amalgam was called CBT. But the cognitive therapy wing, really was not based on, you know, uh, hard cognitive science. That's not what happened. It was based on asking people, what are they thinking?
Really?
Categorizing that. Absolutely. People like Ellis and Beck, I mean, these are people I knew and spent a lot of time with, as well as Skinner and all the rest. I mean, I'm that old.
Yeah.
And Volpe, all the people I knew talked to, you're talking to an old guy. Uh, but lay theories or clinical theories of cognition just didn't give the same kind of scope and precision of things like reinforcement and stuff. And I was frustrated with it. Well, the second wave had the idea that since we know that what you think changes what you do, that's true. If what you're doing is linked to thoughts that are odd or irrational or incorrect, what we should do is try to get people to change those thoughts. Detect, challenge, dispute, and change. Notice your thinking, notice the errors, be able to analyze them, test them, change them. And when you do that, things will get better. Now, it turns out there's some things in there that are helpful. For example, just the very first thing, notice your thoughts. Way helpful. Notice whether or not it's helpful. Way helpful. Challenge them. Wait a minute.
Mm.
A minute. If you're challenging a thought, where are you focused? On the thought you're challenging.
Yeah.
Suppose it's a wackadoodle thought. Suppose it's one that's really, boy, just tangles you all up in knots. Well, there's no delete button in the nervous system.
Mm.
I mean, you can remember if you have a good memory of, crying mama to your mommy. I mean, and if you're in a fire or something, you're about to use your life, people will go back to hiding in the corners and calling out for mama. It doesn't go away just because you're
Yeah.
60 some years old or something.
Yeah.
Under certain conditions, all of that old stuff will show up because that's the way the brain, short of brain injury, is organized.
Yeah.
It doesn't have an easy delete button. And good thing, because if it did, we'd try to delete all of our so-called bad experiences, and then we'd just be dumb as a rock because
Yeah. That's what
look at
learning is, right?
yeah, that's what learning is. Look at how many things you learn from your mistakes. Let's eliminate all mistakes. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
bad idea. That
Mm.
means you can't learn at all, dude. Uh, yeah, so the third wave was my name. I came up with it as my presidential address for
Oh,
the,
look at that.
yes, I did, in 2004. And I declared its arrival. ACT was already 20 years old, but we only had a couple randomized trials because we were trying to figure out the processes, components, philosophical assumptions, and all of that to be able to deal with human complexity in this new way. But fortunately, one way a friend of mine says it with a little bit of a sneer, the hippies grew up. And
Mm.
suddenly, Marshall Hanahan is there, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is there, and metacognitive therapy, and on it goes.
Mm.
A whole fruit nut seed mix of methods that were linked to things that were happening in the 60s and 70s, psychedelics, human potential movement, all of that
Mm.
kind of thing, Esalen, all of that. And figuring out a way to put it into people's lives in a way that wasn't so loony toony. Especially, we didn't want to go back to the train wreck of psychedelics, which only lasted for 2 years before you were running away from the Haight-Ashbury. I was there. I know it. Believe me, Back to the Land was not so much about the land. It was getting away from the dog poop on the sidewalks with needles and people lying in the gutters. It
Oh
was then
no.
instantly. I mean, it was 2 years later. Summer of Love
Gosh.
turned to Summer of Nightmares. Well, and we're bringing that back with psychedelic assisted therapy, hopefully not
Mm.
in a crazy way. But
Mm.
what I'm saying is, this whole generation had been through a set of experiences that invited people to step back and look at and open up to their own experiences. And that happened with, Suzuki and Watts and early kind of bringing Eastern ideas in. It happened with the human potential movement and things like Esalen, with psychedelics and the rest. So the third wave arrived with my little precious ACT stuff with only 4 randomized trials.
Right.
But
And by
fortunately,
now it's 1,000 almost, or close
well,
to that?
it has 1,000. If you go to the website, you'll see 1,200, but we have 150 that we're about to fully vet because they come mostly from China and other places. So we'll be above 1,300
Wow.
for the end of the year, and there's a new one every 2 to 3 days. In every area you can think of, from winning a gold medal at the Olympics to running a business or having relationships that work or being able to manage diabetes or, yes, of course, these so-called disorders, these pretend entities that are
Mm.
crushing humanity inside the DSM.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, well, at the time when we said the third wave had arrived, and I said that out loud, it was almost ludicrous for me to do it because I had only 4 randomized trials behind the stuff I had done. But it has captured the hearts and minds of an entire generation. I think that generation is about to move on to some other things we'll get into, and I hope some of the things we're doing will point towards where it needs to go. But the difference is, first wave of behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy. Let's use principles from non-human animals to focus on overt behavior. And yes, emotions and cognitions, but in a kind of a clunky way. Second wave, let's get in there and actually deal with the cognitions and maybe even give them primacy. Maybe that's where the emotions and behaviors that are troublesome are coming from. But kind of in a more clinical way of the theories, which led to trying to change the thoughts instead of other options. Well, like what
Mm.
other options? Well, how about changing your relationship to your thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what the 60s and 70s taught a whole generation. And when we put it into evidence-based psychotherapy, sure enough,
Mm.
that was powerful. And so mindfulness and acceptance work, values work, all these kind of your relationship to your experience work shows up. We call it the third wave. And it begins to open the doors from CBT to all these other rich traditions, including relational analytic work, existential, humanistic systems, and so on. And now we're at the present day where some very new things are happening, but that's the quick summary of the evolution of psychotherapy,
Right.
evidence-based psychotherapy at least.
Yeah, yeah. It's so cool to see how it really moves sort of into more and more universally applicable, methods and processes and principles. Like especially with ACT, as you just said, it's not just therapy, it's also training. It applies in all sorts of different fields. You can be an athlete. How do I perform better? If it's in relationships, how do I relate to my wife better? It's just kind of everywhere. These processes of psychological flexibility, which you talk about, sort of
Super exciting. And, we just published an article. It's for free. It's open access. You can get it. You search for something having to do with ACT and 1,000 randomized trials, you'll find it. It's the Journal of Contextual Behavioral Science, where we looked at the first 1,000 RCTs. And I'm really, really proud of this statistic. 21% of those focused on traditional DSM disorders.
Mm.
And then in the high 30s or low 40s, there's another chunk focusing on behavioral health, on diet, sleep, exercise, and dealing with the challenges of physical disease, addiction. And then about another 38, 40% on context, social problems, high performance, and the whole fruit nut seed mix of positive goals that people have, relationship issues, stigma, prejudice, and sports and all the rest. So, only 1 out of 5 studies. And even if you get really liberal and you say, did it even have a measure of anxiety, stress, anxiety? Okay. If you even had a measure like that, then it goes up. Excuse me, I said anxiety twice. Depression, anxiety, stress.
Right.
That takes it up to around a third. So from the beginning, and now over 40 years of development, we are a wing that has said, look, we're interested in the whole human being. And guess what? They have a lot of problems, and they have goals that are not problems at all. They're prosperity goals.
Yeah.
They're trying to do things positively.
Yeah.
Can we hack the human mind in such a way that we have principles that are high precision, high scope, evidence-based, that apply across all these levels of analysis, even up into organizations, relationships, community, neighborhood, etc., but all the way down also to how your body regulates your genes or shortens your telomeres, and the answer is yes, we can. And we've now done the research to look at all the processes of change that have ever been identified and replicated in a randomized controlled trial focused on mental health. And I can say a sentence that captures all of them. Do you want to hear the sentence?
Please.
Dear human beings, please learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in life. Scale that to your relationships and take care of your body. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, what we mean by open is cognitively and emotionally open. What we need by aware is in the present moment in a way that's flexible, fluid, and voluntary, but guided by a deeper sense of self that doesn't artificially demand that only certain things be seen. This more witnessing, noticing sense of awareness that connects you in consciousness to others. And what we mean by actively engaged is what do you want your life to be about in the really deep way of the intrinsic value of things in what you do, not the goals and things that, not the awards and the money and the gold, the blue ribbon. No, I mean, the things that are intrinsic to your behavior and building habits around that. And what do I mean by social extension? I mean your relationships, your culture, your community. And what do I mean by your body? I mean, you've got one, dude, and if you treat it like dog doo-doo, you're going to suffer and you'll have a short life. So show up to the fact that diet, sleep, exercise, and out of that, yes, brain circuits and, telomeres and epigenetic stress hormones and all the rest will follow. So that short sentence, and then you drop a pin and you say the end, period, is because there's not new things that will be discovered. But the new things are going to fit into a larger system of how do we learn to vary what we do, select the winners, retain them, and fit them to context across the psychological dimensions of attention, sense of self, emotion, cognition, motivation, overt behavior, but also across the dimensions of our social and cultural world and the dimensions of our biophysiological world. When you do all that, and when you're able to do it in a way that longitudinally within your life, and there we go to the new things we're coming up with. When you do that, you got the keys to the kingdom. And
Right.
that's an empirical fact. I think I can defend it. And so an expanded psychological flexibility model, expanded because we have to start talking now about emotional openness and so forth, not just acceptance, or about cognitive openness, not just our ACT term we call diffusion.
Mm-hmm.
Expand it, but you also need to expand it across levels. You're
Mm-hmm.
not just a psychological creature, you're a physical, biological creature, but you're not just that, you're a social creature.
Mm.
And so it has to be biopsychosocial, not just as a throwaway or a quick word you can say, but really seriously in terms of what you measure, target, and change. That's the keys to the kingdom. And, if I follow we're dead tomorrow, I'm confident that 20 years from now, we're dealing within that same space. We'll have a lot of advances. And I have an idea of somewhere where it's going to come with AI and all the things, cool things we're doing now.
Mm.
But we have learned a lot from 50 years of really in-depth science work. And it has nothing to do with what Big Pharma wants you to know, which is whether or not you have this disorder or that. It has almost nothing to do with that.
Mm.
It has to do
Yeah.
with your evolution as a whole person and evolving your life on purpose.
Wow. Yeah, this is really where I just got so excited when I discovered that this study existed. Because as a layperson, someone who's not a therapist, I was just interested in, what do we really know? What is sort of the summary of sort of the current state of what do we know about what makes people kind of better and function better and, flourish in life? I discovered that you and your team had been doing this. You've been working on this study for what, 3 years continuously? I think
That
for,
study took 3 years, and it took 50 people, mostly volunteers. It wasn't funded, working for 3 years to look at, what was it, 45,000 studies, 2 to 3 times each, and then dial into the ones that had replicated mediators. What you mean by mediators are the functionally important pathways of change. And replicated meaning that you're not p-hacking, you're not
mm,
after the study searching around trying to find out why.
mm,
Now that you know it works, let's ask why. I think that's cattywampus. It should be deal with the principles and processes that are answering why questions and then put them into the techniques that work. But okay, that's why ACT had 20 years with almost no randomized trials, because that's what we
mm,
were doing.
yeah,
But all right, if you want to just jump into randomized trials, fine. But at least ask why. And
yeah.
when you and summarize all of it, it leads to that short sentence I told you, which is pretty remarkable, that we
Hmm.
can say to the entire world in all of the areas where we know that the human mind is important to your outcomes, which, by the way, is almost every area you can name.
Mm,
Learn how to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a life worth living, and scale it to your relationships and your body.
mm.
It's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Yeah.
I mean, I go like, wow. And it's
Yeah.
a long time to get there. When you get there, you go like, duh.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, especially if you've studied some of, the ancient sort of spiritual wisdom traditions. They've been saying this stuff for a very long time.
Oh
And
boy. And it
yeah,
ain't just the East. Don't be telling me
yeah,
that.
definitely.
Look at the mystics. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
all the traditions came from mystics.
Yeah,
All of them,
yeah,
right? They had mystical experiences and then they came back and they wanted to share it. Well,
yeah.
there's no way to share it by like, go my pathway,
Mm,
so instead you try to share it with words.
yeah. And what do
And
people
within
do?
about 10 minutes, people are fighting over words.
Yeah,
Ah!
yeah.
So
You missed it.
it's the
Yeah,
paradox of the human condition that the mystics try to guide us through means and methods that mishandled lead to the exact opposite of the message they're trying to get us to see.
yeah.
Like every major religion will boil down to the centrality of love.
Mm,
Is there any that don't?
mm. Don't think so.
None.
Mm,
None. Yeah, but if you're judging and criticizing others and like off with our heads to the infidels, does that
yeah.
look for anything? No.
Mm,
You can find a scriptural quote for it.
yeah.
And people sometimes will say, oh, well, it's those Islamists. Dude, come
Mm,
on. What do the
yeah,
Crusades,
yeah.
dear Christian?
We got a few skeletons in the closet. Yeah,
Every single one
yeah.
have skeletons in the closet. Not from the mystical founder,
Mm,
but or the people who read the scriptures that came from it
Yeah.
and interpreted it in ways that were judgmental and critical of themselves and others. And next thing you know, you've got scrupulosity and you've got hateful interactions with people who don't read the same holy books. And
Yeah.
so when science gets involved, which now for the first time ever, we've got I used to say Western science, and I just caught myself. You got experimental science
Right.
dealing with these deepest issues of the human condition with all the tools we've got, whether it's fMRIs, let's look at brain scans, or it's really careful. And we're learning a lot about how to bring some of these principles into human lives. And we're getting tangled up a little bit because we made some big errors statistically that we'll get into that probably. That's first. That's new. We didn't do that before. There
Yeah.
wasn't, the attempt to science-ize wisdom. And it's not an easy journey, but it's an important journey, and it adds something to the conversation. I don't want to eliminate all the retreats and all the, I don't want to eliminate anything,
Yeah.
but I don't, and I also want to claim that I'm guru. I just, boy, early on realized that the feet of clay of gurus is something to be noticed and
Yeah.
learned. I can start going on a rant on that if you talk
Yeah.
about.
Not necessarily an enviable position, right? To be a
Yeah,
guru.
Saki Roshi and all the other ones. I'm enough of a hippy dippy guy to have seen some of these train wrecks.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but stripped out of that, inside the wisdom traditions is something that scientifically I think we can find it and we can put it into humans' lives as something that adds to our culture. Doesn't track the wisdom traditions, but does give a little thing of saying, but don't get too overwhelmed by every little dharma from every little whatever, because a lot of those things carry things that are not scientifically valid.
I guess that's where the real strength of sort of modern empirical scientific methods comes in. And unfortunately, psychology has been sort of rife with a big replication crisis, right? Like where so
Uh,
many studies just could not be replicated. And even if they are replicated, as you mentioned, how often do you really know which process was responsible for the
exactly.
good effect? You can study a protocol for CBT for depression, and that's wonderful, but it doesn't tell you which process was responsible for making that person better.
Exactly.
Whatever the diagnosis of depression means, I mean, we could go into a little bit of that as well. Where does that DSM disease model come from? And is there any scientific support
Well,
for these
here's where
categories?
I think you want to know where I think the replication crisis comes from. My
Mm,
personal opinion.
mm,
It's because the model that we're using to do the science is fundamentally flawed.
mm,
Fundamentally flawed. And the open science movement is fine. It's great. It's wonderful.
mm,
And it will not solve the problem. It'll help us find more about where the problem is,
mm.
because if we're vague about our procedures and how we do things and so forth, but there's this sort of idealized view of how science is supposed to be. You state your hypothesis. Yeah, come on. Early science, we're out there looking at the stars and very carefully trying to see where they are. Where's the hypothesis?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and, this particular view, this Popperian view, etc.,
Mm,
falsification, rest,
pretty new.
is, I think, mostly nonsense. And
Mm,
modern philosophers of science see it that way. But there's something even deeper and darker and worse,
mm,
which is that in the behavioral sciences, we've bought into a biostatistical model that measures the impact of what we do by central tendency between people. And we know that it's important, it's significant, or it has an effect size, even if you're trying not to use p-values,
mm,
you still have an effect size. How big was the effect?
mm.
By using a rubber ruler that allows you to measure how big the effect is.
Right.
That rubber ruler boils down to variability between people.
Mm,
In other words, we use differences between people
mhm.
to measure changes within people. Slow down.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that? The
Mhm.
early statisticians knew full well that they were making the assumption that differences between people reflected differences within people. They knew that full well, and they worried about it a little, but they didn't have a solution to it. We now do. We're developing them even. We're on to it. But kind of worse than that, they didn't want to know. Why? Because all of the early biostatisticians from Galton forward, every single one was a eugenicist.
I was waiting for the word to drop. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
dude, 2/3 of the presidents of APA, big APA, American Psychological Association, from 1892 to 1947, 2/3 were card-carrying eugenicists. I gave my last lecture, May 22. My mentor came, John Cohn, wonderful man. And I did something a little harsh. I said, John, just prepare yourself for it. I'm giving this rant about why stats are wrong, the way we're using them, and why it's created the replicability crisis, so-called. I said, John, prepare yourself because I'm going to talk about your mentor, but just a little to get to your mentor's mentor. And I knew it was there, and I went and looked, and sure enough, John to Alan Edwards, good, great psychometrician, the Edwards personality inventory. That's the same. That's my grandfather intellectually from that part of my from John as a mentor. I also Dave Barlow and David Sloan Wilson I consider a mentor, but his mentor A.R. Gilliland, good man, one of the first big studies of reinforcement ever published, and also the author of the first infant intelligence test. Wait a minute. Why would you be developing an infant intelligence test? There he is, graduate from Chicago, the Chicago School, functionality, all those people, Dewey and James and, John, Jacob Cantor, if you know the interbehaviorist. And there it is. I dig and I find it. 1917, a eugenicist rant from my great grandfather. So almost everybody who is a psychologist has a family history that's dirty. And here's back to the replicability crisis. The problem is this. When you go from a bell curve and standard deviation was Galton's invention, first described in his book called Hereditary Genius. And who is his grandfather?
Ooh, was it Malthus or
Erasmus Darwin?
Oh, right.
Who is his cousin? That's
Darwin.
easy now. Charles Darwin.
Yeah.
Which chapter in The Origin of Species he was fascinated by that his cousin had written? It was artificial selection. And what did he want to apply it to? Deciding who is worthy enough to have babies.
Right.
Human babies. Not cows, not raising sheep. No, we're talking about eugenics.
Yeah.
And so here, coming back to the replicability problem, here's the problem. I'll do a very short version, and then we can explore and see where we want to go with this. Statistical physics proved in the 1800s, only about 20 years after Galton's, standard deviation, with a guy named Boltzmann, that you can't go from a collective to knowing what the individual elements of a collective do, unless there's no changes in trajectories of the behavior of those units, and every unit has the same dynamic model. 20 years
like a
ago,
gas in a vacuum, for example.
Yes, a gas in let's say a volume of gas. They couldn't measure the molecules, but they could measure the volume. You can heat it up, you can swirl it around, if we can change forces, etc. How do they behave in a volume? If there's, no matter where you place the sensors, eventually they all show the same mean and standard deviation. If you look across time, no matter where you place the sensors, over time they show the same mean and standard deviation. No trends. It's always the same dynamic model. Then the behavior of the collective is identical to the behavior of the molecules.
Right.
It affects every molecule in the same way. Gravity or spinning, centrifugal force.
Yeah.
In every molecule, even though you can't measure it, you know it.
Yeah.
because, okay, and that theorem, it's just called the ergodic theorem, is massively used in physics for all kinds of things, water systems, things like that, because it has massive implications. It kind of relates time to space because you trajectories over time, no matter where you place a sensor, where you place it, space. Okay. Here's the problem. About 20 years ago, a guy named Peter Molinar, who happened to have the training in physics, a psychologist at the time, was in the UK. Had to leave because they had mandatory retirement. He was at Penn State. I think he's retired now, but he said, wait a minute. Each individual is kind of like a different spatial sample. Their behavior over time is like a different temporal span sample. That means that if you have a bell curve and you know your percentile rank and all of that, it only predicts your trajectories over time if there's no trends and every person is identical and has the same dynamic model, which would only apply if everybody was a frozen clone.
Right.
We're not doing studies on frozen clones.
Yeah, we're dynamic human beings, all individual, unique.
Exactly. So now here's the problem. All of our biostats are, when they're applied to the use case, they're fine for what they're intended for. What do you tell that particular couple, that particular family, that particular person to do? Or what predicts the success of that particular person based on their IQ score?
Right.
Or achievement score, or personality, big five, or on it goes.
Yeah.
You're assuming ergodicity, and it doesn't apply.
It doesn't
So
apply,
how do you know that because you're 98th percentile or 3rd percentile, how your life is going to evolve over time? And the answer is you don't. Now, nobody listening believes that because you're sitting at the
That
table.
can't be true. That's so radical.
We've built our entire world over the last 150 years on these normative categories. That can't be true.
Yeah.
It turns out it is true. And here's the other thing that's horrifying. When you now create, and it's really hard because all the stats that tell you they do this, they're lying to, you create stats that allow you to model each person and their trajectories first. Any contamination of other people, and then look for similarities to other people, retaining only those that help you understand the individual even better, at least most individuals. When you do that, the world looks completely different. So radically different. The only way I could compare it to where we are right now, what my life is like when I meet with the data club for 2 hours, as I do every week, and look at the new findings, it would be like what happened when we had microscopes and we saw that there were creatures in the water. It's like that.
It's that different. Yeah.
It's that different. And it's shocking. And so here's the replication problem. Take a non-random sample of people with a normative category. People have this problem. People have that problem.
People have depression. People have whatever it is.
People have depression. It's non-random.
Yeah.
Even if you had the full, like in some of the, Sweden and so forth, everybody is being tested. Yeah, but people can say, I don't want to be in your freaking study.
Yeah.
So it's not truly a random selection.
Right.
And the knowledge is not going to be applied to a random selection. You're going to apply it to that person who walked in the door. Why'd they walk into the door? It has nothing to do with random sample. It had to do with your reputation, where your clinic is, kind of work that you do, maybe your belief systems. I only want a Christian therapist.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we got a system where the research, in order to replicate, has to be based on assumptions that can't be met with statistical requirements that are never met, and everybody admits that you're not really randomly sampling, you're not really randomly assigning, and you're not really applying it to further random samples, and then you're shocked that it doesn't work. Can I give you an example quickly to help people understand this more practically?
Please, yeah.
Have you ever seen the bean board where you pour different marbles down the pegs and they form
There's the nails in the board and they fall like a standard pattern at the bottom? Yeah.
Exactly. That was Galton's, he called the quincunx board or the bean board. it works because at each point says the polynomial distribution is 50-50.
Right.
And the marbles are sized, so that's true. If you use small marbles, they'll split out because once they get momentum, it's not 50-50 on the next
Right.
nail, the next
Right.
peg, because it carries slightly over the middle point,
Right.
right? But if you get the right size marbles, it'll work perfectly. You'll have a random distribution. If you pour in, let's say, black marbles and white marbles, one peg different at the top, they'll be different at the bottom.
Right.
Okay? Wonderful. What if instead, when somebody falls down, the nails are really hot and it burns that thing and it misshapes it such that it's no longer 50-50?
Yeah. Screws up
Or
the whole thing, probably.
what if it put a little mark on it and the next nail somehow could see whether or not a marble is coming without mark and quick move just the tiniest little bit? Would that be modeled by your statistics at the bottom? No, it's not.
No.
Can you say what a p-value means? P equals 0.05. What does that mean?
Oh gosh. This is where I don't have good knowledge on statistics, to be honest.
Okay, well, if somebody would take in a stat class, they will almost always say the incorrect thing. What they'll say is it's only a 5% chance 5% probability that it's due to chance.
Right.
That's not what it means. It means there's a 5% probability, assuming only chance.
Right.
Due to chance means you know what all the little elements are.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the problem with our biostats. The particular marbles you're dropping in at the top are interacting with all these events. Look, I've got an African-American daughter who's almost 55 years old. When she was 2.5 or 3 years old, we were in a pool, a private pool in Salem, Virginia. Even to this day, if you own the club and you own the pool, you can be as racist as you want. And the club secretary came over and said, your baby's kind of brown. And I thought it was because, we hadn't put sunblock on her or something. No, it's because she's an African-American baby. And we were being thrown out.
What year was this?
Yes, as my second year of graduate school. So it was 1972. Right. It could still happen today.
Yeah.
Still legal.
Yeah.
You'll leave survey if you can believe it.
Yeah.
If it's a public facility, no. But if it's, but here's my point. How often has something like that happened to her? Everywhere she
Probably
goes,
plenty. Yeah.
Probably plenty.
Yeah.
I went home and wept because I knew I couldn't protect that. Are you telling me that the probability is 50-50 all the way down? She's brown wherever she goes.
Yeah.
Don't tell me reared together, reared apart. She's brown wherever she goes. So we don't, here's the problem. I think the replicability process comes because we're not modeling the individuals and the impact of our treatments on them. We're modeling the collective, assuming it applies to individuals, which it doesn't, because the assumption can't be met because we're not frozen clones. And we doing our stats in a way that allows us to say this: what empowers or lifts up individuals? And different things for different people. Model that, figure that out, and then drop that in and see if it replicates. And guess what? We have done that in psychology. I can name you a couple of really good principles. Reinforcement. How many animals, when do you see reinforcement if you're a behavioral type? One animal at a time. Yeah. That's what the principle came from. And it applies to almost every living creature, except mold and a few things that evolved before the Cambrian. They don't do it. Yeah. If you want to shape slime mold, good luck. But spiders, great. Horses, no problem.
Already there. That's how deep it is.
That's how deep it is, right? So I'm sorry for doing such a long rant.
No, I love it.
We're having a great conversation, but you asked about replicability, and I don't think we're ever going to get it until we stop lying to each other. And we've now taken some of the stats that the statisticians say model the individual growth trajectories, and they so massively distort the individual trajectories that when I show you the data, you would gasp.
Mm.
I mean, I've done it in multiple audiences and they all gasp because the statisticians don't know that on page 242 of Radenbush and Burke, it says we're trying to find the latent construct by eliminating outliers and squeezing it into a single model.
Yeah. Yeah.
In order just to look at the individual, why would you do that? Well, because I'm not really trying to model the individual. I'm trying to model the collective. Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a normative principle I can apply to all. Dude, you're never going to.
Yeah. And that's how you end up with a mental health infrastructure where if you walk into the doctor's office, you get labeled with some big category in the front of your head. And there you go. That's who you are.
Exactly. You can never escape it. And in the first pages of the DSM, it says word for word, do not use this to pick treatment. It's not what it's designed for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and then kids hate it. They won't buy a book on abnormal psychology anymore. If you want to teach abnormal psychology, you have to call it, psychopathology. You have to give it a euphemism because people hate that we're going to. Yeah, but they also think that the way that they're going to get to be an individual is to have 10 normative categories because it's the only thing they've been taught tattooed on their arm.
Right.
That's I'm an ADHD who also has PTSD, who also have.
Yeah. But what are the underlying processes there?
Yeah. Do you know how many combinations there are to come up with a DSM diagnosis?
If you multiplied them all, that would be a very large number.
If you include the specifiers, it's 161 septillion.
There you go. Yeah. How useful is that?
How useful is that? There's no known treatment utility to the DSM. In other words, there's no evidence that people get better, faster, cheaper, that their lives improve more when you do that diagnosis versus not. But there is on personalizing interventions, and there is a little bit of data on personalizing interventions to meet the process needs of people. Just personalizing gives you a bump of about 0.15 standard deviation, which means just take the chains off the clinicians and say, don't just use the whole protocol, use the elements that are relevant. But we also know that you get bigger movement with people who have process needs that are targeted by your interventions. Well, duh.
Yeah.
If you're already really good at values, why do you need a whole lot of values work?
Yeah. You need something else. Yeah.
You need something else.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah. This is where I think it gets very, very exciting what you're doing with PsychFlex, this digital tool where you can actually start measuring how an individual is progressing through, let's say, the treatment or the training, whatever's happening. And you can start to identify, if I understand it correctly, the actual processes and how is this intervention targeting this process, and you need a little bit more of that. And then hopefully the effect sizes will actually start increasing again, which they haven't for a long time.
That last part, we really need the studies, but at least we know that the kernels of intervention we are delivering are driven by the individual needs of the people we're treating. So what we've done, PsychFlex is a commercial app. You can check it out at psychflex.com. And people can buy a single license and give it to as many people as they want for free. So if you have 30, 40, 50 clients, it'll be empty until you provide them the content. And in the app is all this content. But it's also in this app is this separate app called Mindgrapher that was developed inside a charitable organization that I'm president of. Why do it that way? Because I'm also part owner of PsychFlex. I've worked on this for 4 years. Why? Because the game I'm trying to play is to take high density longitudinal data of enough people that be put behind a firewall controlled by world-class scientists who will allow pro-social questions to be made of those data, learning how to individualize and personalize treatment, but without Apple and Google getting their dirty hands on it and selling it to pharma, which is exactly what's happening. Every duck in the pen is doing AI driven by venture capitalists with the vision of, if I get the data, I can sell it for $1 gazillion. Yeah, but who are you going to sell it to? Who wants to give you help for misery? Well, there's different industries out there, but there's a big one we can name, and I just did.
Mm-hmm.
We're at the point where 1 out of 4 females in North America last year were on antidepressants.
Yeah.
You could not defend more than 1 out of 25 based on the science. And oops, we forgot to mention about 60% will have permanent sexual side effects that appear to be even lifelong. And oops, we forgot to mention that little black box warning that you get on the commercial television. Warning, this could increase your suicidality.
Yeah. An
What?
antidepressant.
An antidepressant? Did
Did I hear
I
that?
And that was forced in by the Europeans, not the US. We never would have had it happen other than the, forcing out some of the data through freedom of information and through the good, hard work of some psychiatrists and psychologists in Europe.
Mm,
But it hasn't slowed down at all.
yeah.
It's going up even faster. And if you go out in the Biscayne Bay and catch fish, it'll have so-called antidepressants, so-called
Yeah.
antipsychotics, and painkillers in your fish. So enjoy your
Yeah.
meal.
Wonderful. Yeah. And despite all of that increase in drug use, the actual scale of mental suffering in the world seems to be increasing ever so
Of course.
steadily. And there's a massive treatment gap. So many people who need support can't get it. Maybe there's no existing mental health infrastructure. And to me, as a sort of layperson looking at all this, I just wonder, is even the one-on-one therapist to client model going to be sufficient to scale to that level where we can actually help everybody? Do we need to start looking more at group-based intervention? Can we integrate this into education? Can we, guided self-help? Is there some other way that we can actually, scale it? What do you think is going to happen?
We cannot create a system in which 5 out of 5 people need help. And after COVID, don't we all know that we're in that world?
Yeah.
We went from a world where 1 out of 5 have mental disorders, so-called, even though it doesn't tell you what to do. You get the tag, you get the tattoo, you got that problem. 4 out of 5 is supposed to have pity on those people, and we call that destigmatizing. It's not destigmatizing. Don't expect too much of Uncle George. He's got a major depressive disorder. That's not destigmatizing. That's disempowering. Yeah, it's kinder than what the hell's wrong with you, but it's not kinder than being there for what Uncle George actually needs to have a life worth living. And so we're into a world now where change is happening so fast and people feel overwhelmed, and our cultural methods of helping people own up, show up, and live a life worth living are falling apart. Our religious traditions are falling apart. None of the above is the fastest growing religious group, more than doubled in the last 10 years. It's up to beyond 25% of the population of the US of A. And I'm not against that. I mean, I'm not holding for traditional religious belief, but I'm just saying, look, these cultural institutions took a long time to build and they're falling apart fast. And bowling alone, I mean, even things like the Kiwanis, the Lions Club, or things like that is falling apart fast. And people are trying to find identity in things like hate-oriented political groups, or walling off differences by making sure that nobody black or brown can enter the country, or whatever it is your strategy is. Look, we're going to have to do something that where all of us are going to have to learn to deal with a rapidly changing world. I mean, we're only 10 years away, probably, from everybody has their own robot. What do you think's going to happen to the culture when you can just hire your robots? And by the way, some of them are going to look pretty good and you can have sex with them.
Probably.
Maybe not 10 years, but no doubt 50. I mean, look at how porn drove the internet. Do you understand how porn drove the internet? Wake up. Okay, what do you think's going to drive the robots? Yeah, I've got my bet.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not, I'm just saying, this world we're headed towards, you see it in artificial intelligence. And yeah, it can be wonderful if we can harness it, but in order to harness it, we're going to have to be a lot wiser. then some of the ways that we go when we're driven by our fears or our judgments or our pain or our avoidance or our clinging or all the things the wisdom traditions try to rein in, our aspirations for fame and fortune. And so my view of that is tech has to help.
Mm.
AI linked to human needs has to help. And we need process-oriented psychological interventions that can be personalized. If you can get there, we can also personalize physical medicine in a way that will help you with your cancer diagnosis and the rest.
Yeah.
All of the physical health areas are moving in that direction, but not always using, I think, the best stats. So we're gonna have a much better world ahead of us if we learn how to manage it psychologically. But if we don't, what good does it do if we've got our robots and we've got our AI and we're freaking miserable and fighting with each other and can't have relationships that matter, can't do things that feel values-based? It looks to me like a dystopian world, and I think most of us, when I look around, we can see dystopia
Oh yeah.
from here. You can,
Catastrophes or dystopias. Got to find that middle road if possible.
yeah, there's a reason why all those movies are so popular, because people can see it, and and
Yeah.
the artists saw it coming years ago. And you look at I mean, uh, so many of the things we're facing right now were in our movies and stuff 20 years ago,
Yeah.
because artists see it first. They're the ones who are trained to do that. Uh, but now the psychotherapists, the behavior change folks have to show up, own up, clean up, because some of the problems are of their own making. I mentioned one, and there's a great opportunity to be of use to the world
Yeah.
if we can solve it.
Yeah. Let's hope we can make it happen. I'm
Yeah,
looking at the time. You probably have to go.
I have. I bought myself just a few minutes by quick. You noticed I was distracted. I was sending a email to the person I was due to see 2 minutes ago, and I have another
Okay.
8 minutes if there's anything we want to cover. But I hope for people listening, what they've heard is something that is personally uplifting. And can I distill it down to something that I think might be?
Please.
You are an evolving whole. You belong here. You are part of, millions of years of evolution. And you've got a life right now. And even if you're facing a terminal illness or whatever, you've got a life right now. And if you can learn how to focus on the processes of change that lift you up and learn to rein in the ones that push you down, you're never going to reach nirvana, and nobody's going to anoint you as, the Dalai Lama. But you can do better. And what I mean by doing better is not meeting the standards of someone else, but meeting your deepest yearnings. I mean, you come into the world yearning to belong, yearning to be able to be competent. I mean, you stood up and fell down on your diapered butt on average 120 times a day when you were learning to walk, and you learned to do it, most of you, if you don't have a leg injury or something. You came into the world wanting to know where you are. I mean, you're looking around. Babies will work to turn on the light so you can see through a window to see what's going on in the next room. Babies. You want to know what's going on. You want to be oriented. Well, one of the orientation is you're here now. Now allocate your attention in a way that is flexible, fluid, and voluntary. I think you want to understand. Even before language, there's a certain amount of predictability, and non-human animals will work to be able to predict things, even if what's predicted is nasty. Like if you're going to give unevenly spaced shock to an animal will work just to know when it's coming, even though it
That
doesn't
is
have
interesting.
on the shock. We put that on steroids with wanting to understand verbally. And if we mishandle that, we ruminate and worry. If we handle it properly, we can use our verbal skills to do a better job of paying the bills or making sure that trash gets taken out to the curb or wherever, or making sure that a birthday greeting goes to somebody you love or whatever it is you're trying to manage. I think we yearn for a life that's full of purpose that can be socially guided, but is intrinsically owned. And all of our wisdom traditions and religious traditions say you have to own it. You know, you have to knock before the door is opened within a Christian tradition, for example, that story. And so even if you believe in scriptures and there's a right answer that's written down, you still have to own it. And so that personal exploration, made competent, brought into the present moment and oriented and made coherent by using your verbal skills, but also learning from the wisdom of your whole body. I mean, your emotions, your memories, your wisdom comes from the pain of the past being brought into the present in a way that fits. That's the source of wisdom. It isn't just happy, happy, joy, joy. It's also the mistakes you made, people you let down, the betrayals that happened. And so own up, show up, and bring all those processes on board. I've just mentioned the ones that are open, aware, and active. Now scale it to your relationships and taking care of your body, and your life will improve. It'll get better. So my message would be every voice matters. You matter. Your feelings, thoughts, memories, body sensations are valid. Don't stop running from yourself. Stop running, turn around, face the dinosaurs, embrace the moment. And you can learn how to do that in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. If you've had a horrific history, that's going to be hard. It'll take years and years to learn how to do it. If you've dissociated because you learned as a young kid, if you're better to pretend to be someone else than to even know through the continuity of consciousness that you've been abused by your, people you trust or something, that's going to be really hard. And everyone listening to me can get better. Science can help. You can learn it, and it's not so complicated. It's not 161 septillion combinations. It's only something you can say in a short sentence. And it isn't just about act uberalis. Once you get onto it and you look around, it's in your wisdom traditions. It's in the classrooms it's in the heroes that you pick. One of the things I do when I'm trying to explain this to people, I say, pick somebody who is a personal hero of yours or a guide who lifted you up. Ideally, somebody you actually knew in your life. A coach, a parent, a sibling, a friend, a therapist, a teacher, a religious leader, anyone. Quick, I'm going to ask you, did you feel constantly judged when you were with that person? Were you accepted for who you really are? When you were together and your eyes met, could you see consciousness there? Were you connected in consciousness? There was a we? Could you attend to what's of importance in the moment and fit what you were doing to the opportunities there without that person violating your values, without a second thought? And could you sort of then be together in ways that fit those opportunities? Those are the flexibility questions. And here's what I'm saying to you. You know by the heroes you pick, they don't pick them because of the car they drive or the size of the bank account.
Exactly.
In the way you pick them because they lifted you up. That's true of the stories you read, the movies you like. So what's inside that are these very processes. So you know what you need to learn, but you got an organ between your ears that wants to turn you into a problem to be solved instead of a sunset to be appreciated. That doesn't mean that you don't have the capacity to look at a sunset and be wise enough to just say, wow, and shut up. You don't say, it'd be better if it was a little more blue, or that cloud is the wrong thing.
Can we get a little more of this, please?
A little more of this. You just shut up. Okay. Apply that when it's needed. You need problem solving, but there's a time. You want to know what mindfulness is about? It's about wowfulness. Put yourself in a place where you can be in the wow and in the now.
I love that.
That's enough. And yeah, there's a lot of traditions out there that will help you. And And life's asking you to learn it. And if you don't, well, your life won't unfold in a way that gives you the opportunities for love and connection that life has presented you just by the fact that you are alive.
Mm, mm. I think that's a beautiful note to end on.
I think that's a good
Gorgeous.
place to.
All right. It's been a total delight. Um, just before we end, where can people find your work and follow what you're doing?
Yeah, if you want
Um,
to follow me, it's really easy. Just go to myname.com, Stephen
right.
with a V, little initial C for like Charlie, Hayes, all one word, no periods, stephenchayes.com. Click on yes, please send it to me. And every month or so, you'll get a newsletter from me. I don't spam people. It's a one-click opt-out. And yeah, I will talk about PsychFlex and things. Occasionally, you'll know about things that could be bought or whatever. But most of what I
Mm,
write about and put people in contact with is this journey that we're on inside a community that's trying to put science to the task of learning how to be whole and free.
mm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and maybe we'll meet again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Take care.
Take care.